You know, if he had to take the biggest one, the ark would fill up pretty fast. The ark was pretty big, but it'd fill up pretty fast. But maybe he took a teenager dinosaur rather than a 1,000-year-old one. He wouldn't want to take the oldest one because the purpose of the ark was salvation, was safety and reproduction afterwards. So you wouldn't want to take the granddaddy. He couldn't have babies afterwards, right? You'd want to take a young, strong, virile one that was able to survive the rigors of the trip and reproduce afterwards. So you'd take maybe a brontosaur-like creature the size of a cow. There's plenty of room on board Noah's Ark for that. The biblical story makes sense. It works. It makes sense out of the evidence. And then, of course, there is evidence that dinosaurs lived after the flood. Most of the dinosaurs died in the flood. Just these representatives on board the ark survived. But then there is evidence that they lived after the flood. In the book of Job, for instance. This will be your homework assignment for tonight. Go home and read Job chapter 40, starting at verse 15. God is speaking there to Job, and he's pointing out various things in the creation. And he says to Job, "Behold, Job, behold a creature named Behemoth." Then it goes on to describe Behemoth, and it describes it like this. And it was an animal that Job evidently was at least familiar with. Job lived right after the flood. He lived about the time of Abraham, or maybe even sooner. And so if some of the dinosaurs survived the flood, it would be likely that they would live in Job's day more than any other day. And Job seemed to know about dinosaurs. Job chapter 40 talks about a great creature like this. And then Job chapter 41 talks about an animal that lived in the ocean called Leviathan that at least sometimes came out on land. And that creature could even breathe fire. Dr. Gish, in his book, Dinosaurs, Those Terrible Lizards, speculates about how dinosaurs may have had some of the dinosaurs may have had a bony structure on top of their head. Scientists don't know what that is. He speculates maybe that was a chemical storage area that contained and produced chemicals that, when exposed to oxygen in the air, would flash into flame. It's very possible. But, you know, we really don't know because what we have is skull bones and they don't breathe fire. So we don't know. The Bible says some kind of an animal could breathe fire. And maybe that makes sense of some of these legends of fire-breathing dragons. Well, there's other evidence that dinosaurs lived at the same time of man. There's cave drawings of some kind of creature in the Grand Canyon. I'm not going to tell you that that's a dinosaur. Maybe it is. I just don't know. You with me? But along this same cliff are carved many other animals that are recognizable, like buffalo and mammoth, things like that. And then there's that thing. Maybe it is. There's also this thing there. I don't know. I'm not going to tell you that's a dinosaur, but don't know what else it could be. Nobody knows what else it could be. I think one of the very strong evidences that man lived at the same time as dinosaur is in those legends of dragons. Those sayings, many of them have the ring of truth about them. On the table out there is a video that you can purchase called The Great Dinosaur Mystery. Actually, the book, The Great Dinosaur Mystery, has a lot of this in it also. But in that video and in that book are documented many of these, what appear to be sober accounts of dragons and reputable people describing them. All those legends of Sir George killing the dragon, you know, I mean, there's just a lot of stuff like that. Of course, sailors are always talking about dragons. Here's a dragon. I mean, these are just in just recent 100 years or so, the dragons of the ocean attacking ships. There's one. Here's this dragon chewing on that fella. Here we are out there on Seal Beach out here. And you know, 100 years ago, you see the bathing suits. Up comes Puff. Remember Puff? These are not long ago sorts of things. These are modern day sorts of things. And of course, you know, everybody wants to know about Loch Ness Monster. I want to know about Loch Ness Monster. I sure wish I'd hurry up and find that thing and figure out what it was. Many scientists are convinced that the thing is probably a plesiosaur. Somehow survived for 60 million years in the ocean. Actually, to find a living dinosaur would not disprove evolution. but it would sure give him a black eye. Oh my, it would be fun to watch him tap dance around it. Oh, it'd be fun. Here's a very interesting discovery. This was a Japanese fishing vessel just 10 years or so ago off the coast of New Zealand. They were fishing in their nets, and they brought up their nets, and oh my goodness, there was something in the net that they didn't recognize. It's a huge creature. A couple years ago, I talked to a fellow who lived in New Zealand at the port where this Japanese fishing vessel came and docked, and some of these sailors came on board. He talked to them, and they talked about this thing out there on their ship, this thing that looked like a plesiosaur. I mean, it looked like it, and it was a rotting carcass of something that had died just a week or two before. Well, they took some pictures of it. As it turned out, it stunk so bad, those sailors were saying that they couldn't even get on board without vomiting. It smelled so bad. It was a rotting carcass. But finally, they threw it overboard just to get rid of it, to save their catch of fish. Well, they got back to Japan and showed the pictures to the scientists there, and everybody says, oh, for crying out loud, that's the last living plesiosaur. They went back out with 1,000 ships, tried to find this thing. Well, of course, the ocean's a big place, and they never did find it. But the Japanese even published a commemorative stamp, the plesiosaur that had been found. Now, many evolutionists now will poo-poo that, but in reality, they took a sample of the flesh, and the sample of the flesh was compatible with reptile flesh. It was not diagnostic, but it was compatible with it. The shape looks like could be a plesiosaur. Well, don't know. I wish we'd find out things for sure, but there are still even now undocumented stories from rainforest here and there of encounters with living dinosaurs even now. The pygmies in Africa in particular, in the very central Africa and Congo, are forever talking about a dinosaur that they encounter. They have a name for him. They call him Mukele Mumbembe. And they're scared to death of Mukele Mumbembe. They draw pictures of him like this, a small sauropod. I have a friend, a scientist. He worked up here at Jet Propulsion Lab when he did this expedition. He went down to the Congo to actually see if he could find that thing. And it was a terrible adventure. The story he told was just incredible. By the time they got back into this interior lake, it was in a swamp, and they had to wade through about 30 miles of swamp after weeks of trekking through the jungle. And by that time, they had lost all their cameras. Their cameras had gotten moldy, and their film was ruined, and they had no ability to take a picture anymore. But he tells me that on 7 different occasions, he saw the creature, a creature like this. And he said it was gray-green thing, swimming in the lake primarily. He saw it 7 different times. In fact, one time they were out on the lake in a raft. They had gotten in, one of the things that they had been able to get back in there was a rubber raft that they blew up, and were out there on the raft just hoping to see the creature again. And, you know, just out there all day long, about half asleep, and all of a sudden, the head of this thing poked its way up, just 10 feet or so away, just right there, looking the other way. Now, what would you do if you were sitting there in a rubber raft and this head comes up? I mean, you'd do what they did. That's what you'd do. That's what they did. And of course, they made so much noise, the thing turned around and looked at them, and I guess it was as scared of them as they were of it, and it went right back down. They never saw it again. But as it turned out, later that very same night, see, this was a swamp. They had built kind of a platform between the roots of the trees and were living on this wooden platform. And late that night, in the middle of this jungle with a lot of jungle noise, crickets, birds, a lot of noise, they heard a roar of some kind of creature that they had never heard before. A terrible roar and crashing, thrashing through the trees. Well, the one piece of equipment they still had was a tape recorder, and they tape recorded this roar. It was a different roar than they had ever heard before. And as a matter of fact, when they got back to civilization and had that roar analyzed, they were able to distinguish that roar from other roars. You see, every kind of an animal has a different kind of noise. A dog sounds different than a cat, right? And you can run what's called a voice print analysis on each roar. This is the roar voice print of the creature, the unknown creature. And here we have an elephant. You see, an elephant is very different from the creature. And here's a gorilla. Here's a hippopotamus and a wildebeest and a rhinoceros. Every creature is different from that. They compared it to every other large animal in the jungle. And it was totally unknown. It's the unknown creature. Now, I'm not going to try to tell you that that was a dinosaur. I've heard the tape, and it's frightening to hear. It's very different from anything I've ever heard, but as of yet, it's still the unknown creature. They said they saw it.